that tells you that there is something out there.
Pretty hard to spoof that.
Absolutely. Los Alamos, Oak Ridge National Labs, MacDill Air Force Base, Edwards Air Force Base, the remote test site in Nevada, also known as Air Force Flight Test Center Detachment 3. That's the actual terminology for Groom Lake facility.
From what I hear you guys saying, there's something.
I don't know who's building it, who's got the technology, who's got the brains, but there's something out there that better than our airplane.
So it's not us. That's one thing we know.
We know that.
I could say that with a very high degree of confidence.
For someone to try to bust down the walls, it's not going to happen. You'd have to go to all these facilities, get into their vaults, then bring that out as a united coalition. Not one person couldn't do it. It would take a united coalition of acknowledged scientists to come forward with it.
Well, hello everyone. I want to thank you again for taking the time to be with me, and I want to put out a special thank you to the Cousin Brothers, Third Phase of the Moon, for helping me produce these videos. I could not do it without them, so thank you so much. And again, I want to remind everyone to please like, share, and subscribe so we can build this channel. So I prepared 4 new cases for you within the archives here, and we've got the documentation paperwork to back it up. We'll begin with this first slide. Now, this is in October 9th, 1972, Long Island. And basically, the primary eyewitnesses were driving down the road, a little bit kind of into the evening here. And this is in Smithtown, New York, on their way to Coram. And when they reached the 50% mark, it was the wife who saw some lights off to the distance. They kind of went over a hill. And when they got to the top of the hill, she saw the lights first. They kept on going. They made kind of a turn, and then what they actually saw was what I'm calling a flying iron, an actual flying iron that was about 40 feet across. It did have a red light on the left. It had a green light on the right. There was this pulsing heartbeat white light up in front, and then these elongated slot lights on the bottom of it. At this point, the wife told the husband to pull off to the side of the road, stop the vehicle. He stayed in the car, rolled down the window. He never got out of the car. She got out of the car, went onto oncoming traffic to the other lane, and got a very good up-close look at this. Now, what's interesting is that at the back of this craft, there were 2 poles sticking up, and then at the top of the poles, connecting the top of both poles, was this little wire going across. So I ask everyone, does this sound like an alien spacecraft from another world, or is this a lot closer than we think here? And we'll move on to the next slide at this point. Okay, so flyover reported from Long Island. This is UFO investigator, February 1973, and this is the sketch within this report. It's about a 3-page report. They go into details. They go into what the eyewitnesses saw. They actually interviewed both eyewitnesses separately, and I was able to recover it's about a 10-page transcript from the audio interview within this particular case. Very good case. So again, these 2 poles sticking up with a wire across, and then we'll go ahead and we'll move on to the next slide, and that will show you the original sketch from the witness. And you can see here, object as it was leaving, flying very slowly from northeast to west southwest. Object appears about 8 inches long and 6 inches wide if held at arm's length, and you can see the poles and the pulsating light. So again, this is the actual sketch from the primary eyewitness. What are we looking at? What could this be? Is this a man-made technology? Does this look alien to people, or is this again something a lot closer to home? And we'll move on to the next case now. Okay, so I want to highlight the work of my good friend Linda Zimmerman. She's written multiple books about UFOs, fantastic researcher, fantastic author. This is one of her books, More Hudson Valley UFOs by Linda Zimmerman. She's just done a fantastic job. She really deserves more credit. And this case comes from her publication. So I want to highlight her publication. And we'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, so we've got 1953, Saugerties, New York. We have about 12 eyewitnesses. This is June 1953, Saugerties, New York. 12 eyewitnesses see this 300 to 350 foot long cigar-shaped craft. And then Along the vertical axis of this craft, there's these multiple maroon colored, turquoise colored bands of balls that were around the vertical axis of this craft while this is all hovering. Now, what's interesting is, and we'll move on to the next slide here, you can see the drawing that I put together, 300 to 350 feet in length, about 100 feet in diameter, with these orbs going around the outer part of the vertical axis. Now, the primary eyewitness said that there were two F-86 Sabre jets that were trying to intercept this craft. And when they got to the vicinity of where this craft was, this thing took off like a spark in a grinding wheel. Back in 1953, no visible means of propulsion, no visible means of flight controls. What is this? Is this ours? Is this theirs? So what I went ahead and did is I went ahead and commissioned my good friend Rudy Gardia to do a pencil sketch of what this looks like. And this is another world exclusive, ladies and gentlemen. We'll move on to the next drawing here. And here is the F-86 trying to intercept this strange cigar-shaped craft with these orbs around the vertical axis. Back in 1953, there was at least 12 eyewitnesses, and you can read more details within Linda Zimmerman's publication. So again, I want to thank her for her fantastic research. And this is very similar to the encounter and interaction between the F-86 and UFOs from 1951 with Gordon Cooper. So this is another one of these attempted intercepts. And we'll go ahead and move on to the next slide. Okay, Wondrous, 25 True UFO Encounters by Preston Dennett, who really deserves even more credit for the work that he's done. Now, this gentleman has really cranked out a lot of books, so he does deserve credit. And the case I want to cover now is within this book. So I want to provide you with a reference of where I'm getting this material. I'm not just making this up. This is actually documented material. We'll move on to the next slide here. Okay, so let's set this up. It is Moss Landing Power Plant. It's Monterey, California, 1997. It's a little bit into the evening here, right around 7:30 p.m. Now, obviously, this is a daylight shot, so you can see this. Now, the primary eyewitness was with her husband, and they're on the far end of the bay. So what you're seeing here with the Moss Landing Power Plant is a very good representation from what their viewing perspective was. So you have three individuals. They're on the other side of the bay looking to what we see here about 7:30 p.m. at night. And all of a sudden, the primary eyewitness sees this green yellowish glow in the bay. I mean, what could this be? She sees this green yellowish glow, and then all of a sudden, emerging from the bay is this 50-foot across egg-shaped craft. Comes out of the bay itself, Monterey Bay, California, Moss Landing Power Plant, with these famous stacks here. So you can imagine this egg-shaped craft coming out of the bay. And she said, this is very important, she also said that there was kelp falling off the side of it and water dripping off the side of it. Now, this thing started moving closer and closer to the power plant, and then it started raising up to where you see the top of the stacks. And if we go to the next drawing here, the next illustration, this is world exclusive, ladies and gentlemen, another drawing by my friend Rudy. So this egg-shaped craft that had these elongated kind of ellipsoid, you could call them porthole windows, and you can see the kelp coming off this thing. That's a very important point of this case. As this thing got close to the very top, it hovered right up to the openings of the smokestack. And then, ladies and gentlemen, something very strange took place. Out from the side of this egg-shaped craft comes this articulated arm, like the space shuttle arm. And it had a kink in it, and it had one elbow, and then it came down. And then she said, we could not believe what we saw next. It had these pincer arms, and it started snipping the top of the smoke where the top of the smokestacks were, like it was taking samples of the smoke and snipping at the smoke with these pincer claws. I mean, you can't make this stuff up. There was three eyewitnesses, and they looked at it through a telescope. Very good case, and you can read about it in Preston Dennett's book. He did a fantastic job. Credit goes to Preston Dennett for this case. So we'll move on to the next slide now. All right. What you're looking at now is the exact photograph, exact house of where this next case took place. February 10th, 1977, Tucson, Arizona, around 7:30 p.m. This is the exact house where this took place. So we'll set it up. What the primary eyewitness saw looking out the living room window was a light from the opposite view coming toward what you see right here. This is on the other side, there's a schoolyard, and the primary eyewitness saw this white light approaching the schoolyard, kept getting closer and closer and closer, and then, ladies and gentlemen, it parked itself right in the front yard of this house that you see in this picture. This is the exact same house. Now, what is this thing? What did it look like? Primary eyewitness came out of the house, went to the front yard, was looking at this, and we'll go to the next slide, and we'll show you what this thing actually looks like here. Here's the APRO Bulletin, and this is from February 1977, occupant case in Tucson. So what they're looking at, ladies and gentlemen, is about a 3-foot diameter cylinder that's about 6 feet tall. The back of it or the bottom of it was squared off, and the top of it was more rounded. And then within this capsule, there was this inflatable beam that had this ridges along the arms, along the waist. It was gray in color. It looked like an inflatable beam. It had kind of a square window cutout with a very faint outline of a human being. Now on the bottom of this, there was this kind of crystalline red and blue light with a yellow hue light around the craft itself. And we'll move on to the next slide here. Here's an enlargement of what this thing actually looks like. So what happened next is the primary eyewitness actually went up and almost touched this. She got within about 2 feet of it as she was trying to touch the bottom of it. Now, while all this is going on, there were 5 military helicopters within the vicinity that were monitoring all of this. There were at least 2 eyewitnesses who saw this up close. And then we'll go on to the next slide, which is a world exclusive, another drawing by Rudy. You can see the primary eyewitness was actually trying to touch the bottom of this thing back in 1977. You see the helicopters in the background. But what's interesting is separating the outer part of the transparent section of this capsule, there were these bars coming down, almost like a jail room. These bars were coming down, and then inside these bars was this inflatable beam. And we'll move on to the next slide here, which gives you a good idea of what this inflatable beam looked like. Now, she didn't see any visible means of propulsion. There were no flight controls. There were no buttons or switches or dials or levers. She didn't see any cockpit windows or instruments, just this beam and this red, purplish blue light with kind of a yellow hue around it, all back in 1977. So is this one of ours? Is this one of theirs? Obviously, the military is monitoring it because they had at least 5 helicopters that were orbiting the scene. So the military was aware of it, that's for sure. So again, I want to thank you for your attention. We've considered 4 additional cases from the quite a few cases that we can go over. We don't have there's plenty of material to cover here, ladies and gentlemen. There's no shortage of cases. And again, I want to thank the Cousin Brothers for helping me produce these videos. And the goal, again, is to preserve an important part of our national history through the use of illustrations. And I want to thank you for your attention.
And that tells you that there is something out there.
Pretty hard to spoof that.
Absolutely. Los Alamos, Oak Ridge National Labs, MacDill Air Force Base, Edwards Air Force Base, the remote test site in Nevada, also known as Air Force Flight Test Center Detachment 3. That's the actual terminology for Groom Lake facility.
From what I hear you guys saying, there's something.
I don't know who's building it, who's got the technology, who's got the brains, but there's something out there that better than our airplane.
So it's not us. That's one thing we know.
We know that.
I could say that with a very high degree of confidence.
For someone to try to bust down the walls, it's not going to happen. You'd have to go to all these facilities, get into their vaults, then bring that out as a united coalition. Not one person couldn't do it. It would take a united coalition of acknowledged scientists to come forward with it.